Abigail Moore didn't cry when her brother slid the train ticket across the kitchen table like she was something he was finally done paying for. She just looked at it, looked at him, and understood quietly, completely, that she had never been a daughter to this family. She had been a problem, and problems didn't get goodbyes. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow Abigail's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The ticket sat on the table between them like a verdict. Abigail Moore stared at it for 3 full seconds before she trusted herself to look up. The kitchen smelled the way it always had. Biscuits, wood smoke, and something underneath that she had never been able to name. Resentment, maybe, or indifference. She wasn't sure there was much difference in this house. Her brother Gerald stood at the far end of the table with his arms crossed, and that expression on his face, the one he wore when he had already decided something and was only bothering to tell her as a formality. He was 31 years old, and he had their father's jaw and their father's eyes and their father's particular talent for making a person feel like they were taking up space that belonged to someone else. "Wells Crossing," he said. "Town out west. You'll take the southbound coach Thursday morning." Abigail didn't move. "And if I say no?" Gerald smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It never had been. "Then you keep sleeping under my roof, eating my food, and making my wife uncomfortable, and I keep reminding you every single day what a burden you are." He paused. "Your choice, Abby." Her younger brother Cale was leaning against the doorframe behind Gerald, picking at the edge of his thumbnail with a pocket knife, barely paying attention. He was 26 and had always treated her the way men treated stray dogs, not with cruelty, exactly, just with a fundamental disinterest in whether she was suffering. "There's a rancher," Gerald continued. "Name of Caleb Hart. He put out word through the land office that he needs a wife. Not a real one, he made that clear enough. Just someone to manage the household accounts and keep the place from falling apart. He's paying the travel fee and offering board." "He's paying," Abigail said slowly, "to have a wife shipped to him. He's compensating for the inconvenience of transport." Gerald's voice sharpened just slightly. "Which is more than you've earned here." There it was. That sentence. The one they always found their way back to no matter how the conversation started. She hadn't earned it. Hadn't earned the roof, the meals, the use of the family name. Hadn't earned the basic dignity of being treated like a person who existed on purpose. Abigail looked back down at the ticket. Wells Crossing, Colorado territory. She had never been west of the river. "What do you know about this man?" she asked. Gerald shrugged. "Rancher. Widower. Got some kind of scar on his face from a fire years back. Keeps to himself. The land office agent says he's hard but fair." He said it like it was a selling point. Like hard but fair was the best she could expect. "You're 24 years old, Abby. You've got no prospects here, no money of your own, and frankly—" He paused, and she could hear him choosing the words carefully, the way he always did when he wanted to wound her without leaving marks. "No one in this county is going to come asking for you. This is what's available. You ought to be grateful." Cale snorted from the doorway without looking up. "Grateful." Abigail breathed in slowly through her nose. She thought about the 7 years since their parents had died, the way Gerald had taken over the farm accounts and quietly, methodically made sure that her name appeared on nothing. No deed. No inheritance record. No legal standing. She had worked those years, cooked, cleaned, kept the ledgers, managed the household with the kind of competence that Gerald took credit for in town, while treating her at home like a charity case he resented having to maintain. She had stayed because she had nowhere to go and no money to get there, and now he was solving that problem by sending her somewhere else. She reached out and picked up the ticket. "Thursday," she said. 6 in the morning. Don't be late. Coach won't wait." She folded the ticket in half and held it in her fist and looked at her brother. Really looked at him and felt something happen inside her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something older and quieter than both of those. It was the final, settled understanding that she had spent 7 years waiting for something from this family that was never going to come. Waiting for Gerald to see her, waiting for Cale to stand up beside her even once, waiting for some evidence that she mattered here. She was done waiting. "Fine," she said. She turned and walked out of the kitchen. Nobody stopped her. Done. She packed her bag that night. It didn't take long. She had less than she should have after 24 years of living, which told her everything she needed to know about what this house had given her. 2 dresses, a wool coat that was starting to fray at the cuffs, her mother's silver hairbrush with the cracked handle, a small notebook she used for arithmetic, the photograph of her parents from their wedding day, which she had kept hidden in the lining of her trunk because she knew Gerald would have taken it if he'd found it, not because he wanted it, but because he understood that she did. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time after the house went quiet. She thought about Wells Crossing, which she couldn't picture. She thought about a man named Caleb Hart, who she couldn't picture either. She thought about the word Gerald had used, rancher, and the way he'd said it like it was supposed to make her feel small, like being sent west to marry a stranger was punishment. But here was the thing Gerald didn't understand, and probably never would. She had already been living in a house where she wasn't wanted. At least in Wells Crossing, the terms would be honest. The coach left before the sun was fully up on Thursday morning. Abigail was there at 5:40 with her bag at her feet and her coat buttoned to the throat. The morning was already humid and thick, the way summers in Missouri went, the kind of heat that settled in your lungs before you were fully awake. She stood at the corner where the southbound coach stopped, and she did not look back at the house. There were 4 other passengers, a merchant and his wife traveling as far as Kansas City, a young man in a new hat who looked nervous about something, and a woman of about 40 with sharp eyes and a canvas satchel on her lap who introduced herself without being asked as Mrs. Clara Briggs. "You traveling far?" Clara asked, once the coach had been moving for about 20 minutes. "Colorado Territory," Abigail said. Clara raised her eyebrows. "Alone?" "Yes." "Family out there?" "No." Clara studied her for a moment with those sharp eyes, not unkindly, just directly the way practical women looked at things they were trying to assess. "You running towards something or away from something?" Abigail considered the question more seriously than Clara probably expected. "I'm not sure there's a difference," she said finally. Clara smiled at that, a real smile, small and genuine. "No," she said. "I suppose there isn't at a certain point." They rode in relative silence after that, which suited Abigail fine. She watched the land change through the window as the day wore on. The flat green fields of Missouri giving way to broader, drier stretches. The sky getting wider. The horizon pulling back like it was trying to show her something. She had the notebook open on her knee, but she wasn't writing in it. She was thinking. She was thinking about the land office letter that Gerald had left on the kitchen table, the one he'd read aloud from, with that mocking edge in his voice, like the whole arrangement was inherently ridiculous. Caleb Hart of Hart Range, near Wells Crossing, Colorado Territory, seeks a capable woman of sound character for a household arrangement of mutual benefit. No romantic expectation. Board fair compensation and private quarters with a working lock provided. With a working lock. She had read that line 3 times. In her experience, a man who thought to mention a working lock was a man who understood something that most men didn't, that a woman moving into a stranger's house had something worth protecting. That her safety was a thing requiring acknowledgement, not assumption. She didn't know what that said about Caleb Hart, but it was the one detail that had made her pick up the ticket and walk out of her brother's kitchen without crying. The coach stopped for the night at a way station outside of a town called Pryor. Abigail ate a bowl of thin stew at a long table with the other passengers and the 2 coach drivers. She didn't speak much. The merchant's wife talked at length about her sister in Kansas City. The young man in the new hat drank too much and fell asleep leaning against his own saddlebag. Clara Briggs ate steadily and efficiently, and then produced a small Bible from her satchel and read quietly until the lantern was turned down. Abigail lay on the narrow cot in the shared women's room and listened to Clara's even breathing, and thought about what she knew about Colorado Territory, which was not much. She knew the elevation was high. She knew the summers were short and hot, and the winters were hard. She knew there were mountains. She had never seen mountains. She put her arm over her eyes and breathed slowly, and did the thing she had trained herself to do in the years since her parents died. She sorted through what was certain and what was unknown, and she did not allow herself to catastrophize the unknown. That was survival, not hope. She wasn't ready for hope. Hope was a thing that required some faith that the future would be different from the past, and she didn't have evidence of that yet. What she had was practical information. She had a ticket. She had a destination. She had a man who had written the word lock into a formal letter and meant it as a promise. She would see what he was worth. 2 days later, the coach rolled into Wells Crossing in the long slanted light of a summer afternoon. Abigail stepped down with her bag and straightened her coat and looked at the town. It was smaller than she'd expected and larger than she'd feared. A main street with a general store, a land office, a feed merchant, a church at the far end, with its steeple white against the blue sky. Mountains rising to the west in ranges of blue and gray, so large and close that they changed the quality of the light, cooled it, weighted it, made the air taste different. She had not anticipated that. The air. She stood on the boardwalk outside the coach station, and a man came out of the land office doorway across the street. He was taller than Gerald, taller than anyone she'd seen recently, with the kind of breadth through the shoulders that came from years of physical labor, not vanity. He wore a plain dark shirt and weathered trail boots, and a hat that had clearly been through some weather. He walked across the street toward her with a steady, measured pace, not hurrying, not performing. He stopped in front of her. The scar ran from his left temple down across his jaw. Old burn scarring pulled and silvered. The kind that didn't fade anymore, just became a permanent part of the face. His eyes were gray, very steady. He looked at her for a moment without speaking, which she found she didn't mind. Most people filled silence with whatever they were afraid of. This man seemed comfortable in it. "Miss Moore," he said. His voice was low and even. "Mr. Hart," she said. He glanced at her single bag. Something crossed his face. Not pity exactly, more like recognition. Like he understood something about traveling light. "My wagon is at the livery," he said. "We've got a 2-hour ride up to the ranch." "All right." He picked up her bag before she could, not as a courtesy performance, but as a practical matter, the way a man picks up something heavy when he's standing right next to it, and the other person doesn't need the strain. She noticed that, the absence of theater in it. She followed him across the street. "The land office man," she said after a few steps. "He said you don't want a wife." Caleb glanced sideways at her. "He's not wrong. He said you want survival." "That's more accurate." She nodded slowly. "What kind of survival?" He paused at the entrance to the livery, looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "The ranch has been losing ground for 2 seasons, he said. "Accounts are a mess. My cook left in the spring, and my foreman's wife left with him. I've got 6 ranch hands doing the work of 10, and nobody keeping the household from falling apart." He said it the way she imagined he said most things, directly, without apology or embellishment. "I don't need a wife. I need someone capable. The letter explained my terms. Board and fair compensation," she said. "Private quarters, working lock. Yes? And no romantic expectation." "Correct." She studied him for a moment. The scar, the steadiness, the complete absence of condescension in the way he looked at her, which was more unusual than it should have been. "I can manage accounts," she said. "I've been keeping the farm ledgers for my family for 7 years. I understand crop rotation, livestock costs, seasonal labor budgeting. I learn fast and I work hard, and I don't complain about difficult situations." She paused. "I'm not looking for romance either, Mr. Hart. I'm looking for circumstances where my capability is allowed to be useful." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Fair enough." He walked into the livery. She followed. The ride up to Hart Range took the full 2 hours, and they spent most of it in silence. Not uncomfortable silence, but the particular silence of two people who had agreed on something and didn't feel the need to perform warmth they didn't yet mean. The mountains got closer and larger and more real as they climbed. The air changed. The summer heat was still present, but leaner up here, cut through with something pine sharp and clean. The road narrowed and the wagon moved steadily, and Caleb Hart drove with the loose-handed competence of someone who had made this trip 10,000 times. Abigail watched the land and asked occasional practical questions. How many acres? He told her. How many head of cattle? He told her. The name of the foreman who'd replaced the one who'd left. Reed, he said. Good man. Quiet. The accounts, she said. How far behind are they? He was quiet for a moment. 2 seasons' worth of disorganization. That's manageable, she said. He glanced at her sideways. Something in his expression shifted, not quite surprise, but adjacent to it, like he'd been braced for something else. You haven't seen them yet. No, she agreed. But 2 seasons of disorganization is still 2 seasons. It's not structural failure. It's recoverable. He looked back at the road. Yes, he said after a moment. It is. The ranch came into view as the sun began to lower toward the western peaks. It was larger than she'd imagined from Gerald's dismissive description. The main house solidly built in dark timber, a barn, several outbuildings. The summer pastures spread wide and yellow-green in the long light. Hart Range. She looked at it. She thought about the letter with the word lock in it. She thought about Gerald's face when he'd slid the ticket across the table. She thought, I will not fail here. Not because of Caleb Hart. Not because of any man. Because she was 24 years old, and she had been capable her entire life, and she was done being in places that refused to notice. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. He got down and came around and offered her a hand, down which she took. Your room is inside, he said. Second door on the right, keys in the lock. She nodded. He started to turn away. Mr. Hart, she said. He stopped. I intend to earn what you're paying me, she said. I want you to know that from the start. Whatever you've been told about my situation, whatever reasons you might have been given for why I'm here, I want you to judge me by what you see in this ranch, not by what anyone else decided I was worth. He looked at her for a long moment, the gray eyes. That's all I ever judge anyone by, he said. And he walked toward the barn. Abigail Moore stood in front of Hart Range with her bag in her hand, and the mountains at her back, and the summer evening folding itself quietly around her. For the first time in 7 years, she was somewhere new. That was enough. That would have to be enough. She walked inside. The key to the lock was real. Abigail turned it twice that first night, just to be certain. Just to feel the bolt slide home and know that it held. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark, with her coat still on and her bag unopened at her feet, and she listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around her, the low movement of cattle somewhere distant, the creak of timber, the wind coming off the mountains with that clean pine edge she hadn't expected. She didn't sleep for a long time, not because she was afraid, because she was trying to figure out what she was feeling, and the feeling didn't have a clean name. It wasn't relief. Relief implied something had been resolved, and nothing had been resolved. It wasn't hope. She'd already decided hope was a luxury she couldn't afford yet. It was something more animal than either of those things, something that lived in the body rather than the mind. She was safe tonight. That was all she could say for certain. She was safe tonight in a room with a working lock on a ranch in Colorado Territory, 2 days' ride from a kitchen table where her brother had looked at her like she was a problem being solved. She told herself that was enough. She almost believed it. Dia. She was up before sunrise. Old habit. The Moore farm had run on early mornings, and Abigail had learned young that the hours before anyone else was awake were the only hours that truly belonged to her. She dressed quietly, braided her hair, and let herself out into the main hallway. The ranch house was larger inside than it looked from the outside, a long central hall. The kitchen at the back, a sitting room to the left, a room to the right with a closed door that she assumed was Caleb Hart's. She moved through without touching anything, cataloging quietly. The kitchen was functional, but poorly organized pots stacked without logic, the pantry shelved in a way that guaranteed waste, the wood box nearly empty. She found an apron on a nail by the door and put it on. She built a fire in the stove from the wood that remained, and found coffee and a cast-iron pan and flour and salt pork, and she had breakfast started before she heard boots on the floorboards in the hall. Caleb Hart stopped in the kitchen doorway. He was dressed already. She had a feeling he was always dressed before dawn, and he looked at her standing at his stove with an expression she couldn't immediately read. Not anger. Not warmth. Something careful. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "The wood box is nearly empty. I'll need someone to replenish it before tomorrow morning, or we'll lose the fire before breakfast is done." A pause. "I'll tell Reed," he said. "Thank you." She set a plate on the table without ceremony. "Sit down, Mr. Hart. It's getting cold." He sat. She poured coffee and set the cup beside the plate, and then she sat across from him with her own cup and her notebook open, and she said without looking up, "I'd like to see the accounts after breakfast. And I'll need someone to walk me through the outbuildings. I want to understand the physical layout before I start on the ledgers. It'll help me catch anything that's been miscategorized." Caleb was quiet for a moment. She looked up. He was watching her with those steady gray eyes, and there was something in them that hadn't been there last night. Something she might have called assessment, except it felt less transactional than that. More like he was recalibrating something. "You always move this fast," he said. "I move as fast as the situation requires," she said. "You told me the accounts are 2 seasons behind. That means decisions have been made without full information for 2 seasons. The sooner I understand what's there, the sooner I can tell you what it's actually costing you." He picked up his fork, put it down, looked at her. "The last woman who tried to help with the accounts told me within a week that it was too complicated," he said. "Sent a letter back to the land office saying she couldn't manage." Was she an accountant? No. Was she given the information she needed to actually do the work, or was she handed a pile of paper and left alone with it? Something flickered in his expression. Not quite guilt, but in the neighborhood. "The second one," he said. Abigail nodded. "Then the problem wasn't her capability," she said. "It was the approach. I'll need access to everything: invoices, cattle records, payroll, seasonal contracts. All of it. I won't be able to help you if I'm only working with half the picture." He studied her for another moment. Then he picked up his fork and ate. "After breakfast," he said. "Bye." The ledger room was a disaster. She had expected bad. She had not quite expected this: 3 wooden crates of loose invoices, 2 ledger books with entries that stopped mid-season, a stack of handwritten contracts from ranch hands going back 5 years, and a water-damaged payroll record that had been folded incorrectly and partially illegible. She stood in the middle of it and breathed slowly. Caleb stood in the doorway behind her. "I know," he said. "Do you know what year some of this goes back to?" "Some of it goes back to before my wife died," he said. His voice was flat, not emotional, the way men spoke about things they had processed into fact rather than feeling. "She kept the books. After she passed, I kept the ranch running and let the paperwork accumulate." Abigail turned to look at him. "How long ago did she pass?" 4 years. 4 years of accumulation on top of 2 seasons of active disorganization. She looked at the crates. She looked at the ledger books. She felt the particular calm that came over her when a problem was large and complicated and required patience rather than panic. "I'll need a table," she said. "A large one. And good lamplight. And I'll need you available for questions not all day, but an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. Some of these decisions you'll have to make yourself." "All right," he said. "And I'll need to know which ranch hands have been here longest, the ones who were here when your wife was keeping the books. They'll have institutional memory about what certain costs covered." "That's Tom Briggs and a man named Fowler," he said. "Tom's been here 12 years. She wrote both names in her notebook. "One more thing," she said. He waited. "I'd like you to know that I'm not going to judge what I find in these records," she said. "Whatever state the finances are in, whatever decisions were made in hard years, that's not my business to weigh. My job is to understand what's real and tell you clearly, that's all." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife used to say that," he said. Not with sentiment, just with the slight surprise of someone who hadn't expected to hear a thing again and then heard it. He left her to the work. She spent the rest of the morning organizing, not analyzing yet, just sorting, building the scaffolding that would let her understand what she was looking at before she tried to interpret it. She moved with a quiet efficiency that she'd developed over years of managing a household that undervalued what she was doing, the kind of competence that became invisible because it looked easy, which was exactly why people assumed it was. Tom Briggs found her at noon. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 60, weathered and slow-moving, but with eyes that were sharp and watchful. He stood in the doorway of the ledger room and looked at what she'd done to the crates of paper and said, "Lord in heaven." "Good afternoon," she said. "You're Tom." "Tom Briggs, yes, ma'am." He took off his hat. "Mr. Hart said you wanted to ask me some questions." "I do." "Sit down, please. There's a chair behind you." She picked up a ledger and opened it to a page she'd flagged with a strip of torn paper. "I'm looking at an entry here from the summer of 1881. $70 marked as Seasonal Adjustment North Pasture. Do you know what that covered?" Tom scratched the back of his neck. "That'd be the fence repair after the slide came down off Miller's Ridge. Took out about 200 yards of line. We had to bring in extra labor." "And was that a one-time cost, or did it recur?" "One time. Ridge settled after that." He paused. "You're going back to 81? "I'm going back as far as the records go," she said, "because I can't tell you where the ranch stands today without understanding what it's built on. Every number has context. I need the context." Tom Briggs looked at her for a long moment with those watchful eyes. "Mrs. Hart the first, Mrs. Hart, she used to say something like that," he said. "Mr. Hart mentioned she kept the books." "She kept everything," Tom said. There was something in his voice, not grief exactly, but the weight of long respect. "She was a woman who understood how things connected. You took out one piece, she already knew what else would shift." He paused. "We all felt it when she was gone. The whole ranch felt it." Abigail looked at the ledger in her hands. "She sounds like she was remarkable," she said. "She was," Tom said simply. "You want to know about the 82 costs too?" "I want to know about everything," she said. He pulled the chair up and sat down. Caleb came back to the house at midday and then again at sundown, and both times Abigail was still at the table with Tom or alone with the ledgers. The second time he stopped in the doorway and watched her for a moment without speaking. She had 3 columns of figures on a sheet of paper she'd laid over one of the open ledger books. Her handwriting was small and precise, and she was moving through numbers the way some people moved through familiar landscape, not haltingly, not performing caution, just naturally navigating. "You eat," he said. She looked up. "I had bread at noon." "That's not eating." He said it without judgment, just as fact. "There's stew on." She looked back at the page. "I'll be done with this column in 10 minutes. "It'll still be warm in 10 minutes. She finished the column, counted once more, made a note. Then she got up and followed him to the kitchen. They ate in the kind of quiet that was beginning to feel less like absence and more like its own kind of language. She noticed things about the way he moved in the kitchen: practical, no wasted motion, no performance. He ate the same stew he'd put in front of her. He poured coffee without asking if she wanted it, which she found she didn't mind because she always wanted it. "Tom Briggs said you were going back to 81, Caleb said. "Yes." "That's further than I expected. The 81 fence costs have been miscategorized as recurring infrastructure. They're showing up in the seasonal budget projections for this year as an expected expense." She looked at him across the table. "You've been setting aside money for a cost that isn't coming back. It's not a massive number, but it's compounding. It's affecting how much you think you have available for actual needs." He was still for a moment. How much? He said. She told him. His jaw tightened slightly. Not from anger, from the particular expression of a man who has suspected something is wrong, and is now being shown exactly how wrong, which is its own kind of hard. There's more, she said. But I want to finish the full picture before I give you numbers in pieces. Pieces without context can mislead. How long will it take you to have the full picture? 3 days. Maybe 4, if the payroll records are as damaged as they look. He nodded, set down his coffee, looked at her. You found all of that in 1 day, he said. I found the beginning of it, she said. 1 day doesn't show you a ranch. It shows you where to start looking. Something shifted in the way he was looking at her. It was subtle, the kind of shift that happened in the eyes, more than the face, a slight adjustment in what was being assessed. She had seen that look before, or a version of it. It was the look people got when they had expected less and received more, and weren't sure yet what to do with the difference. She looked back at her coffee. The stew is good, she said. It's a basic recipe. Still good. A pause. My wife made it, he said. Then quickly, the recipe. I learned it from her. It shows, Abigail said. There's care in it. He didn't respond to that. But he didn't look away either, and she had the sense that she had said something that landed somewhere real in the careful quiet of a man who had learned not to let most things through. The first real test came on the 3rd morning. She was in the yard when she heard voices raised near the barn. Not the regular noise of ranch work, but something sharper with the specific edge that came from a dispute rather than labor. She came around the corner of the main house and found 2 of the ranch hands squaring off over something near the feed bins, and between them a 3rd man she hadn't seen before, younger, maybe 20, with the look of someone who'd been told something he didn't like. She walked over. What's happening here? She said. All 3 of them turned to look at her. The 2 older hands exchanged a glance that was not subtle. The younger man, she would learn his name was Danny, said, It's a ranch matter, ma'am, nothing that concerns... Mr. Hart left me in charge of the household this morning, she said calmly. If something is happening on this property, it concerns me. What's the dispute? A pause. One of the older hands, whose name she'd learned was Fowler, cleared his throat. Danny here took the last of the feed grain for the south horses without signing the inventory. Now there's nothing left for the north pasture horses until the supply wagon comes Friday. She looked at Danny. Is that accurate? Danny's jaw tightened. I was going to sign it. I just hadn't gotten to it yet. The signing happens before, not after, she said. Because the point of signing is to prevent exactly this situation where 2 parts of the operation are working without knowing what the other has used. She looked at Fowler and the other man. How much do the north pasture horses need to get through to Friday? Fowler told her. She did the arithmetic quickly in her head. Split the remaining grain, 2/3 north, 1/3 south. The south horses can supplement with the hay in the east bin. I saw 3 bales yesterday that haven't been touched. That gets everyone through to Friday without shortage. She looked at Danny. After this, you sign before you take. Not because I'm watching, but because the ranch runs on information. If we don't know what's been used, we can't know what we need. Understood. Danny looked at her for a moment with that expression young men sometimes wore when they'd been corrected by a woman and hadn't decided yet how they felt about it. Then, yes, ma'am. Good. She turned to go, then stopped. Danny? He turned. You made the right call taking grain for your horses. They needed it and you got it. That's good ranching. The paperwork is how we make sure good decisions don't create problems for someone else. That's all it is. She saw something in his face relax. She walked back to the house. Behind her, she heard Fowler say something low that she didn't catch, and then heard Danny say quietly, Yeah, all right. Caleb heard about the feed grain dispute from Reed that evening. He came into the ledger room afterward and leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed and looked at her the way he'd looked at her that first morning at breakfast, that careful recalibration expression. Reed told me what happened at the barn, he said. It was a small problem, she said without looking up. It's handled. Danny's been giving Reed trouble since spring, he said. Nobody's managed to settle him down without it turning into a standoff. It doesn't have to be a standoff if you don't make it one. She looked up. He's not a bad worker. He's young and he doesn't like feeling like he's being managed. So I didn't manage him. I explained the logic and gave him credit for the right part of the decision. The problem stopped being about him being wrong and started being about the ranch running correctly. That's easier for everyone. Caleb was quiet for a moment. That's a particular skill, he said. It's observation, she said. Most problems have a practical solution if you're willing to see what the actual problem is rather than the one you expected. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "The payroll records, do they still need another day?" "Half a day," she said. "Tomorrow afternoon, I'll have everything I need to give you the full picture." He nodded. He started to leave. "Mr. Hart," she said. He stopped. "Whatever the numbers show tomorrow," she said, "I want you to know the ranch is not broken. Disorganized, yes. Undercapitalized in some areas, yes. But the bones are solid. I can see that already." She paused. "I thought you should know that before we sit down with the full picture. Because numbers without context can make things look worse than they are." He turned slowly and looked at her from the doorway. The scar on his face caught the lamplight, and for a moment she could see exactly what it must have looked like when it was new and raw and terrible, layered over whatever expression he'd worn on the day of the fire. And she thought not for the first time that there were many ways to survive something that should have destroyed you, and not all of them left visible marks. "Thank you," he said. He said it quietly, and she had the sense that he meant more than the words covered. "Good night, Mr. Hart," she said. "Good night, Miss Moore." He walked down the hall. She turned back to the ledger. Outside the mountains held the last of the evening light, and the summer dark came on slow and clean, and somewhere in the north pasture, a horse called once low and clear, and the sound carried all the way to the window, where the lamp burned steady over 2 seasons of numbers that a woman with careful hands was finally methodically making into sense. She gave him the full picture on a Thursday afternoon. She had spent the previous evening organizing her findings into 3 categories: what was certain, what was probable, and what required his decision, because she had learned years ago that handing a man a wall of numbers without structure was the fastest way to make him feel cornered, and cornered men made bad decisions. Caleb sat across the table from her in the ledger room, and she walked him through it without rushing, without softening, and without dramatizing. She told him what was real. The miscategorized fence costs were only the beginning. There were 2 seasonal labor contracts that had been auto-renewed without review, costing the ranch $40 a year for work that hadn't been performed since his wife died. There was a supplier arrangement for feed grain that had been competitive 4 years ago and was now significantly above market rate. She had confirmed this by asking Tom Briggs what the Wells Crossing feed merchant was currently charging, and the difference was not small. There were 3 outstanding receivables from neighboring ranches for cattle sold on credit 2 summers back that appeared to have never been formally collected. She set the total on the sheet of paper in front of him. He looked at it. His jaw tightened in that particular way she had come to recognize not anger, but the physical cost of receiving hard truth without flinching. "That's what's recoverable," she said. "If you renegotiate the supplier contract, collect the receivables, and cancel the dead labor arrangements, you close most of the gap this season." He was quiet for a long moment. "The receivables," he said. "One of those is the Alderman Ranch." "I know," she said. "Tom told me about the Aldermans." "Jim Alderman is my nearest neighbor. We've been on reasonable terms for years." "I understand that," she said. "I'm not telling you to send a lawyer. I'm telling you the money exists, and you have a legitimate claim to it. What you do with that is your decision. I'm giving you the information, you make the call." He looked at the sheet of paper again. "You said there was a 3rd category," he said. "Things that require my decision." "Yes." She slid a second sheet across the table. The north pasture fencing is deteriorating faster than the current maintenance budget accounts for. You're going to lose significant line before winter if you don't address it this summer. That's not optional. It's a question of when, not whether. She paused. But the money for it isn't currently in the operating budget. You'd need to either take it from the reserve or accelerate the cattle sales scheduled for September. Accelerating the September sales means taking a lower price, he said. Yes, about 12% lower based on what Tom says the fall market typically runs. But the alternative is losing cattle through fence breaks during the winter storms, which could cost significantly more. He was silent. She waited. She had learned already that Caleb Hart was a man who needed the quiet to actually think, not as a performance of deliberation, but because he was genuinely working through it, and interrupting that process was counterproductive. "Accelerate the sales," he said finally. "I'll note that in the ledger," she said. He looked up from the papers and looked at her directly. "You've been here 4 days." "5, she said. "I arrived Wednesday." "5 days," he said. And then, with the careful plainness of a man who did not offer praise lightly, "I haven't had this kind of clarity about the ranch finances since Eleanor died." Eleanor. The first time he had said his wife's name aloud in her presence. She noticed it. "She kept good original records," Abigail said. "That made my work easier. Whatever state things got into afterward, the foundation she built was solid. It gave me something real to work back from." Something moved across Caleb Hart's face, then brief and private, and not entirely deciphered before it was gone. Grief, maybe. Or the particular expression of a man who had been carrying a weight alone for a long time and had just been told quietly that the weight had always been worth carrying. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome," she said, and meant it. She expected things to settle after that. She expected the days to take on a rhythm, the accounts, the household, the slow accumulation of a working arrangement between two practical people. And for a little while, they did. She reorganized the kitchen completely on the 6th day, and didn't ask permission because reorganizing a chaotic space was not a personal decision. It was a functional one, and she expected that anyone reasonable would see it that way. Caleb came in that evening and stopped. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at what she'd done. The pots hung by size, the pantry shelved by frequency of use, the wood box full. The work surface cleared, and he was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor organized it the same way," he said. She looked up from the pot on the stove. "I'm sorry if that's—" "No," he said. He said it quickly, and then seemed to catch himself. "No, it's fine." He paused. "It's good. It's logical." She nodded and looked back at the stove. He came in and sat at the table, which she was beginning to understand was his version of permission. The act of entering a space and sitting down was how Caleb Hart said he was willing to be present. "The alderman receivable," he said. "Yes. I'm going to ride over to Jim's place tomorrow and talk to him directly. Not as a collection matter, just as neighbors settling an old account." He paused. "It's been sitting too long. It needs to be addressed." "I think that's the right approach," she said. "You don't think I should push harder?" She turned to look at him. "I think the money matters. I also think you have to live next to the aldermans after the money is settled. Both things are true. A conversation between neighbors handles both. A formal demand handles only one." She turned back to the stove. "But again, your decision. I give you information. You make the calls." "You keep saying that," he said, "because I mean it." A pause. "Most people who offer help want control," he said. "They want the credit for the outcome. I want the ranch to run well," she said. "That's all I want. If it runs well, I've done my job. The credit doesn't interest me." She heard him shift in the chair behind her. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "That way of thinking." She considered the question. "From watching what happened when I didn't have it," she said. "In my brother's house. When I kept the books there, every solution I found Gerald presented as his idea. Every efficiency I created he took credit for in town. And for a long time I was angry about it." She paused, stirring the pot. Then I realized I'd been asking the wrong question. I kept asking why he wouldn't give me credit. I should have been asking why I needed his approval to know my own worth. The kitchen was quiet. "That's a hard thing to learn," Caleb said. "Yes," she agreed. "But once you learn it, nobody can take it from you." She heard him get up a few minutes later. She heard him stop at the kitchen doorway. "Supper smells good," he said. 20 minutes, she said. She heard him walk down the hall. She allowed herself alone in the kitchen one small moment of something that wasn't quite happiness, but was adjacent to it. The satisfaction of being in a place where her words were heard without being managed, where her competence was received without being diminished, where a man sat at a table and asked her genuine questions and waited for genuine answers. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. The trouble arrived the way trouble usually did, not announced, not dramatic, just suddenly present. She was coming back from the barn on the morning of her 8th day at Hart Range when she heard the sound of a horse coming fast up the ranch road. Too fast for a social call. She stopped and turned. The rider was young, one of the Wells Crossing boys, who ran messages for the land office, maybe 15 years old. He pulled up hard in the yard and looked around, and when he saw her, he said, "Ma'am, is Mr. Hart here?" "He's in the north pasture," she said. "What's happened?" "Message from the Wells Crossing sheriff, ma'am. He says there are 2 men in town asking questions about Hart Range, about the woman Mr. Hart brought up from Missouri." Everything in Abigail's body went very still. "What kind of questions?" she said. The boy looked uncomfortable. "Sheriff said they're saying she came here under false pretenses, that she's owed back to her family and Mr. Hart's arrangement is irregular." He swallowed. "They said some other things too, ma'am, about her character." She breathed in slowly. "How long have they been in town?" she said. "Since yesterday evening. Sheriff said they're staying at the boarding house." She reached into her apron pocket and took out 2 coins and handed them to the boy. "Ride up to the north pasture. Tom Briggs will show you the way, and tell Mr. Hart I need to speak with him when he's able. Don't hurry him. Just deliver the message." The boy nodded and rode off. Abigail stood in the yard for a moment. Gerald, or Cale, or both. She had known on some level, she had refused to examine that it was probably too clean. That a life did not change direction that completely without the old direction pushing back. She had allowed herself over these 8 days to begin to settle, to begin to feel the first tentative edges of something like stability, and now here it was. The past arriving with bad intentions and a boarding house room in Wells Crossing. She went inside, and she sat down at the ledger table, and she opened the accounts book, and she kept working. Because that was the one thing she knew how to do in the face of fear. She worked. She stayed precise. She did not let her hands shake. Caleb came in an hour later. He came through the back door and straight to the ledger room, and he stood in the doorway and looked at her and said, "The boy found me." "I know," she said. She set down her pen. "I assume you know who's in Wells Crossing." "I can guess." His voice was flat. "Your family." "My brothers," she said. "Gerald and possibly Cale." She looked at him directly. "I want you to know what they'll say before you hear it from them." He crossed his arms. He didn't sit, but he stayed in the doorway, and he listened. "They'll tell you I came here under false pretenses," she said. "They'll say the arrangement was irregular. They may say that I'm owed back to them, that they have some legal or familial claim." She paused. "None of that is true in any legal sense. I'm 24 years old, which means I'm not under anyone's guardianship. The arrangement with the land office was properly documented. I came here of my own choice." Another pause. "But they'll also say things about my character, things designed to make you doubt what you've seen from me here, and I want you to hear it from me first, so you can weigh it." Caleb was very still. "What things?" he said. "That I'm dishonest," she said. "That I'm difficult. That I manipulate situations for my own advantage." She said each one the way she might read an entry from a ledger clearly without flinching. Gerald is skilled at building a version of events that sounds credible from the outside. He did it for 7 years in our county. People believed him because he was the head of the household, and I was the dependent relative, and it's easier to believe the person with the authority than the person without it. Something moved in Caleb's jaw. Not the tightening she associated with hard financial truths. Something colder. "What do you want me to do?" he said. The question stopped her. She had expected almost anything except that not what should be done, not a declaration of what he'd decided. "What do you want?" "I want you to do whatever you believe is right," she said carefully. "I won't ask you to take my side against information you don't have. I won't ask you to trust me over your own judgment." She held his eyes. "But I will ask you to wait until you've heard both accounts before you decide. That's all." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'll ride into Wells Crossing this afternoon," he said. "I know," she said. "I'd like you to come with me." She hadn't expected that either. "Why? Because I'm not going to talk about you without you in the room," he said, simply, like it was obvious, like the alternative had never been a real option. She felt something shift in her chest, quick and sharp, like a door opening on a hinge that had been stiff for a very long time. "All right," she said. "I'll get my coat." Wells Crossing. In the midday heat, had the particular tension of a small town that knew something was about to happen and had arranged itself accordingly. She felt the eyes on her when the wagon rolled down the main street, felt them from the boardwalk outside the general store, from the window of the land office, from the two women outside the church who stopped their conversation when they saw her sitting beside Caleb Hart. She kept her hands folded in her lap, and her back straight, and her face arranged into the expression she had perfected in her brother's house, composed, unhurried, giving nothing away. The sheriff's office was at the near end of the street. Sheriff Len Cook met them at the door, a wide, tired-looking man in his 50s, with a gray mustache and the expression of someone who had been dreading this particular afternoon. "Mr. Hart," he said. "Miss Moore." He held the door. "They're inside." She went in first. Gerald was standing near the far wall. Seeing him here in this place that had nothing to do with him in the landscape of her new life produced a sensation that she hadn't predicted. Not fear, not grief. Something harder and colder than either the precise physical sensation of a person who has been through a long siege and is looking at the enemy from behind walls that are for the first time actually solid. Cale was seated in this corner with his arms crossed, watching. Gerald looked at her and smiled. She hated that smile. She had always hated it, the particular warmth of it, the way it was engineered to look like welcome and function like a trap. "Abby," he said, "you look well." "Gerald," she said. She did not move toward him. He looked at Caleb. He was doing the assessment, the quick calculation of the man, the scar, the size, the stillness. She had seen Gerald make that calculation 100 times. He filed people by what they feared, and then he used it. "Mr. Hart," Gerald said, extending his hand. "Gerald Moore, Abigail's older brother. I want to thank you for taking her in. I understand the land office arranged the whole thing, which I'm sure seemed straightforward at the time." Caleb shook his hand once, briefly. "Mr. Moore." "I'm sorry you've been put in this position," Gerald said. He was using his reasonable voice, the one that sounded like a man who was reluctantly delivering difficult news entirely for the benefit of others. "I'm sure Abigail presented herself as capable, and I've no doubt she tried her best, but she has a history of—" He paused, selecting the word with visible care, misrepresenting her situation. "In what way?" Caleb said. "The farm accounts in Missouri," Gerald said. He spread his hands. "She kept them, yes. But there were irregularities, missing figures. I never accused her formally because she's family, but there were questions." He glanced at Abigail. "I'm only telling you because you deserve to know what you've brought into your home." The room was very quiet. Abigail looked at her brother and felt for a moment the old pull, the reflex that 7 years of living in his house had installed in her, the urge to defend herself loudly and immediately, because silence felt like admission. She felt it, and she recognized it, and she chose not to obey it. She let Caleb speak first. "Interesting?" Caleb said. His voice hadn't changed at all. It was still low and even the same register it occupied when he was telling Reed to fix a fence. "I've had Miss Moore reviewing 4 years of accumulated ranch accounts for 5 days. She found 3 significant errors that are recovering substantial money for the ranch. She caught a supplier overcharge that's been running for 2 seasons. She reorganized the operating budget and identified 2 dead contracts that were costing the ranch $40 a year for nothing." He paused. "Those are not the results of someone who misrepresents figures. That's the work of someone who understands them exactly." Gerald's smile didn't disappear, but something underneath it shifted. A very slight recalibration, like a card player who has just seen a hand he didn't expect. "I'm sure she's done good work," Gerald said. "I'm not questioning her intelligence. She's always been bright. The concern is more about her." Another deliberate pause. Stability. Her judgment in personal matters. She has a tendency to form inappropriate attachments, to misread situations. "Is that a specific claim?" Caleb said, "or a general impression?" Gerald blinked. He was not used to being answered this way with questions that forced specificity. He was used to the weight of his assertions being enough to people accepting the architecture of implication without demanding the bricks. "It's a pattern I've observed over years," Gerald said carefully. "Then you can document it," Caleb said. "Give me a name, a date, a specific incident. If there's a genuine concern, I want to hear it clearly." Silence. Cale shifted in the corner. Gerald's smile thinned. "She doesn't belong here," Gerald said, and now the reasonable voice had dropped just slightly, showing the edge underneath it. "She belongs home, with family. She's 24 years old," Caleb said. "She came here of her own free will under a legitimate arrangement. She's done exemplary work since she arrived." He looked at Gerald with those flat gray eyes, and there was nothing in them that could be moved. "If you have a legal claim, speak with the sheriff. If you don't, then I'd suggest this conversation is done." Gerald looked at Abigail, and for a moment, just a moment, the reasonable facade was entirely gone, and she could see what was underneath it. The actual feeling. Not concern. Not brotherly care. Fury, quiet and controlled at a woman who had refused to stay where she'd been put. "You'll regret this," he said to her. She met his eyes. "I regret the years I wasted waiting for you to see me," she said. Her voice was steady. She was very proud of how steady it was. "I don't intend to waste any more." Gerald straightened. He looked at Caleb one more time, taking that last measure, and whatever he found didn't give him what he needed. He picked up his hat from the sheriff's desk. "Cale," he said. Cale got up without a word and followed his brother to the door. Gerald paused with his hand on the frame. "This isn't finished, Abby," he said without turning. "It is for me," she said. He left. The door swung shut. The sheriff let out a long breath. "Well," he said. Abigail realized her hands folded in her lap had been clenched the entire time. She unclenched them deliberately, breathed. She looked at Caleb. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the assessment look, not the recalibration look. Something quieter and more specific than either of those. Something that looked, if she was honest, almost like he was seeing her for the first time. Like all the days of watching her work had built one picture, and what she had just done in this room had added a dimension that changed the whole shape of it. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said, and then more honestly, "I will be." He nodded once. He turned to the sheriff and exchanged a few brief words about the legal standing of the arrangement, which Cook confirmed was sound and documented. He shook Cook's hand and held the door for Abigail, and they walked out into the summer heat of the Wells Crossing Main Street. She got up onto the wagon without help. He climbed up on his side. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb said, not looking at her, looking at the road ahead, "You handled that well." "I was terrified," she said. "I know," he said. "You did it anyway." He released the brake, and the wagon moved forward, and she sat beside him in the afternoon heat, with the mountains rising ahead and the town falling behind them, and she felt something she had promised herself she would not feel. Yet the particular dangerous warmth of gratitude toward another person. Not for what they'd given her, but for how they'd stood beside her without being asked. She looked straight ahead. She did not say anything about it, but she felt it quiet and stubborn taking root somewhere below her sternum, like a seed that had been waiting a long time for the right kind of ground. They didn't talk much on the ride back to Hart Range. That was fine. She was beginning to understand one of the things about Caleb Hart that was not a flaw, but a feature. He did not fill silence with noise just to make it easier to bear. He let it sit, and it sat without weight, and she found that she could think inside it, without the particular pressure that other people's expectant quiet put on her. She thought about Gerald's face when Caleb had asked him for specifics. She thought about the way that smile had thinned. She had spent 7 years in that house, watching Gerald construct versions of reality and present them to people with such confidence that the people accepted them. She had watched it happen to neighbors, to the county land agent, to the minister who came twice a year, and left convinced that Gerald Moore was a man of careful and patient generosity. She had watched it happen, and she had told herself the truth quietly in her own head, and it had not mattered because the truth without a witness was just a private opinion. Today, for the first time, the truth had had a witness. Not a champion, not a defender in the theatrical sense. Just a man who had asked a simple, devastating question, give me a name, a date, a specific incident, and waited and let the silence that followed answer for him. She hadn't known how much she needed that until it happened. She pressed her hands flat against her knees and watched the mountains and breathed. Caleb said without preamble, "They'll come back." "I know," she said. "Gerald strikes me as a man who doesn't accept the first no." "He never has." She paused. "He'll try a different approach next time. The direct confrontation didn't work, so he'll find another angle. He's patient when he has to be." "What kind of angle?" She thought about it honestly. "He'll look for something that makes the arrangement here look unstable or improper, something that gives him a legal or social hook." She looked at Caleb. He might try the impropriety angle, a single woman living in a man's household without formal marriage. In a small town, that kind of talk can do damage even without evidence. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. This arrangement was documented through the land office. "I know that. You know that. Gerald will know that too once he looks into it." She paused. "But documented arrangements don't stop gossip. And gossip in a small town can make life very difficult even when every piece of it is false." He was quiet for a moment. "Wells Crossing has known me for 11 years, he said. "They know how I operate." "They know how you operate as a rancher," she said. "They don't know me at all, and Gerald is very skilled at filling in blanks." Another silence. "What do you want to do?" he said. There it was again, that question. She was still not entirely used to it, the way he consistently returned the decision to her, rather than deciding on her behalf. "I want to keep working," she said. "I want to finish what I started with, the accounts, get the supplier contract renegotiated, and get the north pasture fence addressed before the summer's out." She looked at him steadily. "I don't want to make decisions based on what Gerald might do next. That's how he wins, by making you spend all your energy anticipating him instead of building your own life." Caleb looked at her from the side for a long moment. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. He turned back to the road, and the wagon moved steadily upward into the mountain afternoon, and for the first time since the messenger boy had ridden into the yard that morning, Abigail Moore felt the tightness in her chest begin slowly to release. She was back at the ledger table by evening. She worked until the lamp needed refilling, then refilled it and kept working. She was not avoiding thought. She was channeling it the way she had always channeled the things that frightened her into something that could be measured and managed and made into order. Caleb came to the doorway at 9 o'clock and said, "It's late." "I'm aware," she said. "The accounts will be there in the morning." "So will I." She looked up. "I'm finishing the receivables correspondence tonight. If I have the letters ready, Reed can take them into town tomorrow, and we can get the alderman conversation moving." He was quiet for a moment. "Jim Alderman came by this afternoon while we were in town," he said. She set down her pen. "He did. Left word with Reed. He heard the Moore brothers were in Wells Crossing asking questions about Hart Range." Caleb's voice was even, but she heard the thing underneath it. "He came to say that if there was trouble, his men were available." She stared at him. "Jim Alderman," she said slowly. "Who owes you money, rode up here to offer his help." "Yes." "Before you'd even spoken to him about the debt." "Yes." She picked up her pen and set it down again. "That tells you something about the kind of neighbor he is." "It does," Caleb said. And then, almost to himself, he said he remembered Eleanor, said she was one of the finest women this territory produced. A pause. "He said he hoped the new arrangement at Hart Range was treating us both well." The way he said us both. Quiet, like he'd tested the words for weight before he said them. Abigail looked at the lamplight on the ledger page. "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him it was," Caleb said, "that Hart Range was in better hands than it had been in years." She didn't respond to that. She wasn't sure she had language for what it did to her, not the compliment itself, which she could have received gracefully, but the specific territory of it. Better hands than it had been in years. The years that included Eleanor. The years that Caleb Hart had been holding together alone. "Get some sleep, Miss Moore," he said. "20 more minutes," she said. She heard him almost smile. She had become attuned to the sounds of his almost smiles, the slight exhale, the pause that was half a beat too long to be neutral. 20 minutes, he said, and walked back down the hall. She finished the letters in 15 days. The next morning, she was at the barn before anyone else. Not for any particular task, she had simply woken up at 4:30 and lain in the dark for 10 minutes and decided she would rather be moving. She found the bay horse in the third stall. The one Tom had mentioned was skittish around strangers had been since a bad storm the previous spring, standing with his ears pinned and his weight shifted back. She didn't approach him directly. She stood at the stall door and talked, not to anyone in particular, just quietly, steadily, the way she used to talk through accounts, problems aloud, when she was working them out low, and even no performance in it, just the sound of a human voice treating the space like it was safe. After a while, the horse's ears came forward. After a little while more, he took a step toward her. She heard boots behind her and turned. Caleb was standing a few feet back watching. She hadn't heard him come in. She felt the slight jolt of being observed in a private moment, not embarrassed exactly, but aware, the way a person was aware of suddenly being seen doing something they'd thought was invisible. "He doesn't let most people near him," Caleb said. "I wasn't trying to get near him," she said. "I was just talking." Caleb came to stand beside her at the stall door. Not close the appropriate distance of two people who had established terms, but beside her looking at the horse. "What were you saying to him?" he asked. "Nothing important," she said. "The feed grain situation, the receivables, the north pasture fence." She paused. "He's a good listener." She heard it, the almost smile. Clearer this time. "His name is Scout," Caleb said. "I know. Tom told me." She looked at the horse. "He's not skittish. He's careful. There's a difference." Caleb was quiet. "Eleanor said the same thing about him," he said. It was the second time he'd said Eleanor's name in as many days. She noticed the change, the way he was allowing the name into conversation now, instead of keeping it locked away. She didn't comment on it, but she heard it. "She sounds like she was a woman who understood what she was looking at," Abigail said. "She was," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "She would have liked you," he said, simply, like it was a fact he'd been carrying and had finally found a place to put down. Abigail didn't know what to do with that. She let it land without deflecting it, without filling the space around it with words. "That's a generous thing to say," she said finally. "It's an honest one," he said. Scout stretched his nose forward and touched the rail of the stall door, and Caleb reached over and laid his hand flat on the horse's nose. "Easy." Practiced the gesture of a man who had done it 10,000 times, and something about the sight of it, the gentleness of it. The way this hard-edged, silent man touched the animal with such complete absence of self-consciousness put a small and unwelcome ache directly in the center of her chest. She stepped back from the stall door. "I should start breakfast," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "You're not—" "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to." And that was true. She had found over these days at Hart Range that the wanting to was new. That in her brother's house she had cooked and cleaned and maintained out of necessity and resentment in equal measure. And here she did it because the work itself felt different when it was received as work, rather than as her minimum obligation, as a body taking up space. She walked back toward the house. Behind her she heard Caleb say something to Scout low and quiet, not intended for anyone else. She didn't slow down to hear it, but she smiled alone in the early morning where nobody could see. The supplier negotiation came together faster than she'd expected. She had drafted the letter carefully, not accusatory, not weak, just plainly factual. Here is what we have been paying. Here is what comparable suppliers in the territory are charging. Here is what we are prepared to pay going forward. The numbers were clean and documented, and she had included 2 references to market rate that Tom Briggs had helped her verify from his own memory of the Wells Crossing merchants' posted pricing. Reed took the letter into town on Monday. By Wednesday, a reply came back. The supplier, a man named Carver, who operated out of a depot in Milford, agreed to the new rate without significant resistance. She brought the letter to Caleb, where he was working in the south yard. He read it again. "He just agreed," he said. "He agreed because the letter gave him accurate information and a fair offer," she said. "He's a businessman. He doesn't want to lose the Hart Range account. He was overcharging because nobody had looked at the numbers clearly enough to challenge it." She paused. "He wasn't cheating you. He was just charging what the silence allowed him to charge." Caleb looked at the letter. "That's $80 a year," he said. "Every year going forward," she said. "And this season's overcharge, I've included a credit request in the letter. He's agreed to apply it to the next order." Caleb stared at her. "You got a credit," he said. "It was reasonable to ask," she said. He agreed because it was reasonable. "People generally do reasonable things when you ask reasonably." She paused. "Generally?" He looked at her with that expression she was beginning to know better than she'd expected, to the one that was somewhere between assessment and something warmer. Something that didn't have a name she was ready to use. "Abigail," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She felt it, the precise, specific weight of her name in his voice, different from Miss Moore, different from ma'am, different from the careful professional distance he had maintained consistently since Wednesday morning of the previous week. She felt it, and she catalogued it, and she told herself firmly that she was not going to build anything on a single syllable. "The north pasture fence," she said, keeping her voice even. "Have you talked to Reed about the timeline?" He paused. Let her redirect without comment. "We start Friday," he said. 3 days of work minimum. "I'd like to come out and look at it," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Not to supervise," she said quickly. "I want to understand the physical reality of the costs I'm tracking. Right now they're numbers on paper. If I can see what the fence line actually involves, I'll be better at projecting future maintenance costs accurately." He considered this. "Saturday," he said. "I'll take you out Saturday morning." "Thank you," she said. He folded the supplier letter and put it in his shirt pocket. He started to walk away, then stopped. "You asked me to judge you by what I see here," he said, without turning. "I want you to know I have been." He walked away before she could answer. She stood in the summer heat of the south yard and felt the ache in her chest expand not painfully, but with the particular sensation of something that had been compressed for a very long time, gently, carefully, beginning to be allowed more room. She walked back to the house. She had work to do. Friday night, the second blow landed. She heard it from Tom Briggs, who came to the back door after supper with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man delivering news he would rather not. "There's talk in town, Miss Moore," he said. He said it quietly, which she appreciated. "Your brother, the older one, he's been spending time at the saloon, talking to people, telling a story about why you left Missouri." She waited. Tom cleared his throat. "He's saying you left because there was a man, an attachment that wasn't proper, that you were, he's using the word disgraced." He looked genuinely pained. "I'm sorry to tell you this, ma'am, but I thought you ought to know what's being said before it gets back to you another way." She kept her face entirely still. "Thank you, Tom," she said. "I appreciate you coming to me directly." "There's more," he said. She waited. "He's saying Mr. Hart's arrangement here proves it, that a respectable woman wouldn't come to a situation like this." Tom's jaw worked. "He's been real careful about how he says it. Enough to cause talk without being specific enough to be called a liar." There it was, the second angle. She had predicted it to Caleb on the ride home from Wells Crossing, the impropriety strategy, the social damage that didn't require evidence. Gerald had not gone home. He had stayed in Wells Crossing, and he had been patient, and he had built the architecture of implication exactly the way she knew he would, brick by careful brick, each one deniable on its own. "Is Caleb aware?" she said. "I came to you first," Tom said. "All right," she breathed. "Go ahead and tell him, Tom. He needs to hear it, and he needs to hear it from you, not through a stranger's version." She paused. "And Tom, thank you for the way you said it." Tom put his hat back on. "You're doing good work here, Miss Moore. Real good work. Anyone who's watched this ranch for the last 2 weeks knows it." He paused at the door. "And anyone who's watched you knows the kind of woman you are. Some people are just determined to look at a good thing and call it something else." He left. She sat at the kitchen table alone for a moment. She was not going to cry. She made that decision clearly and deliberately, the same way she made every decision not from suppression, but from purpose. Crying was not going to tell her what to do next, and she needed to think about what to do next. Gerald was in Wells Crossing. Gerald was building a story. Gerald had time and patience, and the particular advantage of someone who was willing to say things in public that the other person would never think to say because they were too busy being respectable. She thought about what Tom had said. Anyone who's watched this ranch knows it. She thought about Jim Alderman riding up to offer help before he'd been asked. She thought about Danny in the yard saying yes ma'am after she'd explained the logic instead of issuing a command. She thought about Caleb's voice saying Abigail and the particular weight of it, and she told herself for the second time to stop building on a single syllable. Then she got up, went to the ledger room, and started drafting a letter. Not to the land office, not to the sheriff, to every ranching household within a day's ride of Wells Crossing that had any recorded transaction with Hart Range in the last 4 years. She wrote clearly and professionally, and she introduced herself by name and role, and she confirmed the terms of the Hart Range arrangement as formally documented, and she invited any outstanding account questions or disputes to be directed to her attention directly. It was not a defensive letter. It was not an emotional letter. It was a woman making herself visible and legitimate in a landscape where Gerald was counting on her being neither. She worked for 2 hours. She was finishing the last letter when the door opened behind her. She turned. Caleb stood in the doorway. Tom had found him. She could see it in the set of his jaw, not the tightening she associated with financial hard truths, but something colder, something that had moved past processing and into resolve. "Tom told me," he said. "I know," she said. He came into the room and looked at the letters spread across the table. "What are those?" he said. "Correspondence to neighboring households," she said. "I'm establishing a documented, visible professional role for myself in the business relationships of this ranch. It makes Gerald's story harder to maintain if the people he's talking to have already received formal communication from me in a professional capacity." He stared at the letters. "You thought of this tonight," he said. "Just now, yes." "In the last 2 hours." "Yes." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. Not with defeat, with the particular weight of a man who is very tired and very angry, and is choosing to be neither of those things in front of someone who deserves his steadiness. "This is my fault," he said. She looked at him sharply. "No. I should have formalized the arrangement more publicly when you arrived. A notice in the land office bulletin. Something in writing that established the terms clearly from the beginning." His jaw worked. "I didn't think it would matter. I've been operating this ranch alone for 4 years, and nobody has questioned my arrangements. Because your previous arrangements didn't involve a single woman from another county," she said. "And Gerald is specifically exploiting that gap. This is not your failure, it's his strategy. He makes his problems into other people's failures. That's the skill he's spent his whole life developing." Caleb looked at her. "How are you this calm?" he said. "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm working. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Sign the letters," she said. "If they go out with your name alongside mine, it establishes joint legitimacy for the arrangement. Gerald can't undermine both of us as easily as he can undermine just me." He reached across the table and picked up the top letter. "Read it." Read it again. "This is well written," he said. "I know," she said. "Not from arrogance, just from accuracy." He set the letter down. "Abigail," he said, and there was her name again, and she was not going to build on it. She had decided that, but it did something to the air in the room every time he used it. She looked at him. "I want you to know," he said, "that whatever he's saying in town, whatever version of you he's building for people to look at, I know what I've seen here. In this house, in those ledgers, at the barn with Scout." He paused. "I know what's true." She held his eyes. "You have no idea," she said quietly, "what it means to me to hear that." He nodded once. He picked up the pen she'd been using, and he began to sign the letters one by one, steady and deliberate, the way he did everything. She watched his hands. She thought about her brother in a Wells Crossing saloon building, a story out of silence and implication, and she thought about this man sitting across from her in lamplight, signing his name to hers, and she understood something she had not fully understood before, that the opposite of being erased was not being defended. It was being seen, being stood beside, being treated as someone whose truth was worth witnessing. She had been waiting her whole life for that. She hadn't known until now how close she was to having it. Outside the window, the summer night held the mountains in its dark arms, and the ranch was quiet. And inside the ledger room, 2 people signed their names to the same pages, and did not speak and did not need to, because some things were already being said in the steadiest possible language, not words, but presence, not promises, but simply the act of remaining side by side in the same light. The letters went out Saturday morning. Reed took them into Wells Crossing before dawn, which was Abigail's deliberate choice. She wanted them delivered before the saloon opened, before Gerald had his daily audience, before the day's version of his story had time to circulate. Reed was back by mid-morning with confirmation that every letter had been placed, and with something else word that Jim Alderman had been in the post office when the letter arrived for his household, had read it on the spot, and had said loud enough for 3 people to hear that it was about time Hart Range had someone competent managing the books. Tom Briggs delivered this information to Abigail in the kitchen with visible satisfaction. "Jim Alderman said competent," she said. "His exact word, ma'am," Tom said. "And Jim Alderman is not a man who uses words he doesn't mean." She went back to the stove and said nothing, but she felt the particular quiet satisfaction of a correct move landing exactly where she'd aimed it. Caleb came in from the yard an hour later, and Tom told him too, and Caleb looked at Abigail across the kitchen with that expression she had stopped trying to categorize and simply accepted as his. The one that was not quite a smile but occupied the same territory. "You knew Alderman would say something," he said. "I knew he was the kind of man who would," she said. "Tom had told me enough about him. People with genuine integrity tend to recognize professional conduct and comment on it. It's not manipulation, it's just understanding that truth has allies if you give it the right opening." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "My wife used to call that reading the room." "It's a good phrase," she said. "She was good at it," he said. And this time, he said it without the careful flatness he'd used before. He said it with something that was simply warmth, the kind a person felt when a good memory had stopped being only painful and started being also true. She didn't look at him when she answered. "So are you," she said. "You read Gerald in that sheriff's office in about 30 seconds. "I've met men like Gerald before," he said. "Most people have," she said. "Most people still believe them." He sat down at the kitchen table, and she poured him coffee without asking, and he accepted it without comment. And that small choreography, unremarkable, unperformed, completely natural, said more about what these 2 weeks had built than anything either of them had put into words. Tom, she had almost let herself believe the letters had been enough. That was her mistake. Not a foolish one, the evidence supported it. 3 days passed without incident. The ranch hands were talking to her as a matter of course, now coming to her with supply questions and scheduling conflicts the way they'd previously waited for Caleb or gone without direction. Danny had signed every inventory entry without prompting. Tom had taken to leaving her morning coffee on the ledger table before she even came downstairs. Reed had started giving her the end-of-day pasture reports directly. Hart Range had absorbed her. Quietly, completely, the way good ground absorbed rain, not as a dramatic event, just as a natural process that made things grow. And then Sunday evening, she heard horses in the yard. Not one horse. 2. She came out of the kitchen and through the front hall, and she knew before she opened the door. She knew from the sound of it, 2 horses ridden hard and pulled up short, which was the particular sound of men who had come to make a point with their arrival. Gerald stood in the yard. Cale was behind him, and Cale was holding something, an envelope thick and official-looking with a wax seal she could see even from the doorway. Caleb was already in the yard. He must have heard them from the barn. He stood with his arms loose at his sides and his hat on, and he watched the 2 men with the same steady expression he'd worn in the sheriff's office. Not aggressive, not welcoming. Just present, immovable. She came out and stood on the porch. Gerald looked at her, and this time he didn't use the reasonable voice at all. He was past the reasonable voice. He had the expression of a man who had decided that civility had failed and was now intending to use something else. "I've retained legal counsel," he said, "in Kansas City." He nodded to Cale, who stepped forward and held out the envelope to Caleb. "That is a formal challenge to the land office arrangement, on the grounds that Miss Moore was not competent to enter the agreement independently, that she was under duress, and that the terms were not fully disclosed to her family." Abigail came down off the porch. "I was not under duress," she said. "I am 24 years old, legally independent, and I entered this arrangement of my own free will with full understanding of its terms." "You were in a desperate situation," Gerald said. "You had no money, no prospects, no real choice. A court may see that differently than you do. A court will see a documented land office arrangement signed by a consenting adult woman," she said. "Desperation is not duress. If it were, half the marriages in Missouri would be invalid." Gerald's jaw tightened. "You don't know what a Kansas City lawyer can do with the right framing. And you don't know what a Wells Crossing woman who has spent 2 weeks building professional relationships with every major ranch household in this territory can do with the right evidence," she said. That landed. She watched it land, watched Gerald recalculate, watched the slight shift in his eyes that meant he hadn't expected that. He looked at Caleb. "You'd defend this arrangement in court." "I'd defend Miss Moore's right to be exactly where she's chosen to be," Caleb said. "Which is here. And yes, in any court you'd care to bring it to." "This is about family," Gerald said. And now his voice had changed again, lower, almost intimate, aimed at Abigail with the specific precision of a man who knew exactly which wound to press. "You're my sister. Whatever happened between us, you belong with your family, not with a stranger." The word belong. She had known it was coming. She had known because it was always the last tool Gerald reached for, when the others had failed the language of ownership dressed as love, the claim of connection that was really a claim of control. She had rehearsed nothing. She had no prepared speech. What came out of her was not performance. It was simply the truth, finally said in the right place to the right audience without apology. "You sent me away, Gerald," she said. "You put a train ticket on a kitchen table and told me to marry a stranger or come back broken enough to behave. Those were your words." She looked at him without flinching. "I didn't belong to you then. I don't belong to anyone now. And the fact that I've built something real in the 2 weeks since that table, something you can't control or diminish or take credit for, is why you're standing in this yard trying to use a lawyer to take it from me." Gerald said nothing. Cale in the background had gone very still. "I am not coming home," she said. "There is no version of what you say tonight that changes that. The lawyer, the framing the duress argument, none of it changes what is true. And what is true is that I am exactly where I chose to be." The yard was silent. Gerald looked at her for a long moment. She watched him searching for the angle, the response, the reframe, the next move in a game he had been playing so long he had forgotten he was the only one who thought it was a game. He didn't find it. And she saw for the first time in 24 years her brother without his armor. Not defeated, not humbled, but simply without his next move, standing in a yard in Colorado territory, at the end of a road he had not expected to be a dead end. He looked old, she thought. Or maybe he had always looked old, and she had only been too frightened of him to notice. "You'll regret this," he said. But it was quiet now. It had lost its architecture. "You've said that before," she said. "It hasn't been true yet." He looked at Caleb one more time. Caleb met his eyes and said nothing, and did not move. And that more than anything was the final answer. The stillness of a man who had nothing to prove and nowhere to be except exactly where he was standing. Gerald turned and walked to his horse. Cale followed. She watched them ride out of the yard and down the ranch road, and she stood very still until the sound of the horses faded into the mountain dark. Then her legs went slightly uncertain beneath her. She didn't fall. She didn't make a sound. But her hand came out and found the porch railing, and she held it. Caleb was beside her in 3 steps. He didn't touch her. He stood close enough that she could feel the solid presence of him, the warmth of another person who was choosing to be exactly there, and he said quietly, "You're all right." Not a question. "Yes," she said, and then honestly, "In a minute." "Take the minute," he said. She took it. Jed. They sat on the porch steps after, because she didn't want to go inside yet, and he didn't suggest it. The summer night was full around them, the mountain dark, the stars, the distant sound of cattle settling. She had her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she'd made because she needed something to do with them. "The lawyer," she said. "Is it a real threat?" "I had Reed ride to fetch the sheriff's opinion this afternoon when I saw them coming," Caleb said. "Cook says the land office documentation is solid. A duress argument would have to prove you had no viable alternatives, which is hard to argue when you clearly had the capability to have made other choices." "I didn't have money," she said. "You had skills that were marketable," he said. "A court would look at the ledger work you've done here and have a difficult time arguing that a woman with your competence had no options." She looked at the coffee in her hands. "Gerald knows that," she said slowly. "He knew the legal threat probably wouldn't hold. He came back because he needed to try something, because he couldn't accept leaving without one more attempt." "Yes," Caleb said. "He won't come back again," she said. Not a question. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Men like Gerald, they move on to more tractable problems eventually. You stopped being tractable the moment you walked into that ledger room. She almost laughed. It surprised her, the almost laugh arriving in the aftermath of the hardest thing she'd done in years, as if her body was already moving past it. "That's a generous way to put it," she said. "It's an accurate one." She looked sideways at him. In the dark, with the lantern light from the window laying itself across the yard, she could see the scar on his left side clearly that pulled silvered territory that had become simply part of his face to her weeks ago, in the way that things became familiar. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "The fire," she said carefully. "You don't have to." 4 years before Eleanor died, he said. It was immediate, not reluctant, like he'd already decided sometime recently that the answer to this question was available to her. Barn fire, 3 horses inside. I got 2 of them out. A pause. The third one I went back for her. The roof came down. He said it the way he said most things, without drama, without self-pity, with the flatness of a man who has processed something into fact. Eleanor was pregnant. She lost the child 3 months later. The doctors said it wasn't connected, but she always believed it was. Abigail was very still. "I'm sorry," she said. Not because she didn't have more words. Because sometimes sorry was the only word that was the right size. "I stopped going into Wells Crossing much after that," he said. "People didn't know how to look at me. The scar, and then Eleanor gone 2 years later, and the ranch going to pieces, I became the kind of thing people talk about in a low voice." He paused. "I got used to it." "You shouldn't have had to," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you get used to a lot of things you shouldn't have to." She thought about 7 years in her brother's house. "Yes," she said. "You do." They were quiet for a while. Then he said, "The arrangement." She looked at him. "The land office arrangement," he said. He was looking straight ahead at the yard at the dark. "It was the right solution for a practical problem. I needed someone capable. You needed circumstances where you were allowed to be." He paused. "I want you to know I'm aware that it's limited. As an arrangement." She waited, not sure where he was going. "I'm not a man who's easy to live with," he said. "I know that. I don't talk much. I'm set in my ways. I carry things I don't always know how to put down." Another pause. "Eleanor used to say I was better at showing things than saying them." "She was right," Abigail said very quietly. He turned to look at her, and she looked back, and the distance between them on that porch step was not very much, and the night was very quiet. "I don't know what this has become," he said. "Honestly, without pretense. I know what it started as. I'm not certain it's still that." Her heart was doing something she had firmly instructed it not to do. She breathed carefully. "What do you think it is?" she said. "I think," he said slowly, "that I have not looked forward to coming into the house at the end of the day since Eleanor died, and I have every day for 2 weeks." He looked at her steadily. "I think that means something. I don't know that I'm ready to say what." She held his eyes. "I'm not ready either," she said, "honestly. I came here not trusting much of anything, including my own judgment about people." She paused. "But I trust what I've seen from you. That's not nothing. For me, that's not a small thing." "No," he said. "It isn't." They sat with that between them, not resolved, not declared, but real. More real, she thought, than most declared things. The truth of it was in the 2 weeks behind them, and not in anything they were ready to say out loud, and that was all right. Some things earned their words slowly. Some things were stronger for the patience. "The north pasture fence," she said after a while. He exhaled, and this time it was a full, real exhale, the almost smile becoming something closer to an actual one. "The north pasture fence," he agreed. "Reed said they finished the east section today." "Yes. 2 more days on the west line. Then we're on track for the September sale timeline." "We are." She nodded, looked at her coffee, looked at the yard. "Good," she said. Monday morning, the reply came from the Kansas City lawyer Gerald had claimed to retain. It was addressed to the land office in Wells Crossing, with a copy to Hart Range. Sheriff Cook brought it up himself, which told her something about how he regarded the matter. She read it at the kitchen table with Caleb standing behind her. The letter stated in the careful language of a lawyer who had looked at the documentation and made a clear-eyed assessment that the grounds for a duress claim were insufficient, that Miss Moore's independent legal status was unambiguous, and that any further challenge to the arrangement would face substantial procedural obstacles. It recommended in the restrained phrasing of professional courtesy that the matter be considered closed. She set the letter on the table. "He didn't even try," she said. "Gerald told the lawyer the situation, and the lawyer told him it wouldn't hold." "Which means Gerald knew it wouldn't hold," Caleb said. He came Sunday anyway. Because it was never really about the legal claim, she said. It was about whether I would break. Whether standing in the yard and hearing lawyer in Kansas City in court would make me doubt myself enough to give him something to work with. She looked at the letter. It didn't. Cook cleared his throat from the doorway. I want to say something if I might, Miss Moore. She looked at him. I've been sheriff in Wells Crossing for 9 years, he said. I've seen families come out west to reclaim a daughter or a sister before. Sometimes they've got a genuine grievance. Sometimes they're just like your brothers. He paused. The way you handled yourself in my office, and the way you've conducted yourself since the letters, the professional communications, the work Tom Briggs has been talking about all over town. He picked up his hat. You've got people in this town who'll stand up for you if it comes to that. I thought you ought to know. She felt something move in her throat. She kept her expression even. Thank you, Sheriff. Hart, Cook said with a nod to Caleb. Len, Caleb said. The sheriff left. She sat with the lawyer's letter for a moment. She thought about the kitchen table in Missouri, the train ticket sliding across it, Gerald's smile. She thought about what she had believed sitting on the edge of her bed that night, with her coat still on, about what was possible. She had not believed in very much. She had believed in the working lock and the practical terms and the possibility of being allowed to be useful somewhere. She had not believed in Jim Alderman riding up unbidden to offer his men. She had not believed in Tom Briggs leaving coffee on the ledger table before she woke. She had not believed in a sheriff who drove up a mountain to tell her she had allies. She had not believed in any of this. And here it was. She picked up the lawyer's letter and folded it and put it in the ledger book, where she kept the formal documentation, and she closed the book and she looked up at Caleb. He was watching her. It's over, he said. Yes, she said. How do you feel? She thought about it honestly the way she thought about everything, without embellishment, without performance. Like someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time, she said, and has just remembered they're allowed to breathe. He was quiet. Then he said, There's one more thing. She looked at him. He pulled a chair out from the table and sat down across from her, not at the ledger table, at the kitchen table, which was different. The kitchen table was where they ate and talked and were simply two people in a house together, rather than an employer and a capable employee managing a financial problem. He put a folded piece of paper on the table between them. She looked at it without touching it. What is that? She said. A proposed amendment to the land office arrangement, he said. He said it carefully, with the particular steadiness of a man who has thought about something for long enough that he's ready to say it plainly. The current terms describe a household management role. This amendment describes a formal partnership interest in the ranch operating accounts, a documented share in the decisions, not just the implementation. She stared at the paper. I had the land office draft it yesterday, he said, before your brothers came. I'd been thinking about it for a few days. A partnership interest, she said slowly. You've recovered money this ranch didn't know it had. You've reorganized systems that have been costing us for years. You've handled a dispute in the yard, and a lawyer's letter, and a supplier negotiation, and a difficult ranch hand, and a skittish horse. He looked at her directly. Those are not the contributions of an employee, Abigail. They're the contributions of someone who has a stake in what this place is. She looked at the paper. Her hands were entirely steady. She was proud of that. This isn't, she started. It's not a proposal, he said, and she could hear him understanding what she'd been about to say. It's not a romantic declaration. It's exactly what it says. It is a formal recognition of what you've already been doing here, and an invitation for it to be permanent. Whatever else develops between us or doesn't, that's a separate conversation for when we're both ready to have it. He paused. But this part, the work, the stake, the belonging here, that doesn't have to wait. Belonging, that word. She had thought about it alone in her room in the first days, and she had told herself it was too dangerous a thing to want. That it was the thing that had made her stay too long in her brother's house, the wanting of belonging from people who were never going to provide it. That she had learned at last to stop wanting it. She had been wrong. Not about the danger, about the learning. She hadn't learned to stop wanting it. She had learned to recognize the real thing from the counterfeit. Gerald's version of belonging was a room with no lock and a seat at a table where your presence was resented. This paper, this table, this man sitting across from her, with his steady gray eyes, and his hands that were honest about everything they touched. This was something different. This was the word meaning what it was supposed to mean. She picked up the paper. She read it. It was exactly what he'd said. It was clear, professional, legally sound. Her name alongside his in the operating documents of Hart Range. A formal documented stake. She set it down. She looked at Caleb Hart. She thought about the train ticket on a kitchen table. She thought about boarding a coach alone in the dark with one bag and no certainty. She thought about a working lock and a scarred man who drove a wagon in silence and asked, "What do you want?" and meant it every single time. She thought about 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks, which was nothing, which was everything, which was the precise amount of time it had taken for her to understand that she had not been sent away as a punishment. She had been sent toward something she would never have found from inside her brother's house. "I'll need a pen," she said. Caleb reached into his shirt pocket and put one on the table. She signed her name beneath his in her small and precise handwriting and set the pen down. She looked up. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her outside the sheriff's office, that quiet, specific thing that was not assessment anymore, that had moved past assessment into something she was not going to name yet, because they had both said they weren't ready, and she was a woman who kept her word. "Welcome to Hart Range," he said. Not for the first time, but for the first time it meant everything it was supposed to mean. "Thank you," she said. Outside, the summer morning was full and bright over the mountains, and somewhere in the north pasture, the fence line that she had helped save was holding, and the accounts were balanced and honest, and the horses were fed, and the ranch was running with the particular clean efficiency of a place where people understood what they were building and had chosen to build it together. Abigail Moore had walked out of a kitchen in Missouri with one bag and a folded train ticket, and the hard, quiet knowledge that she had never been wanted there. She had found in the mountains of Colorado Territory something she had not dared to plan for, a place where her presence was not tolerated, but valued, not managed, but trusted, not punished, but met fully honestly on her own terms. She had not come west looking for love. She had come west looking for ground that would hold her. She had found both, and she had earned every inch of them, and nobody, not Gerald Moore with his lawyers, not any saloon story, not any version of the past that someone else had written for her, was ever going to take them away. That was not a hope. That was a fact. And Abigail Moore had always been very good with facts.